Today's episode of Back to the Roots podcast is brought to you by our newest sponsor, Byron Seeds. Byron has a passion for high-energy forages, cover crops, and supporting farmers. Learn more at byronseeds.net, and we appreciate their support. On today's episode, we have Nathan and Jessica Williams, who are organic dairy farmers in Kentucky. We start with a poem by Wendell Berry, read by Nathan, that influenced their decision to come back to the farm, and then we jump right into their story. We hope you enjoy, and thanks for listening.
Manifesto, The Mad Farmer Liberation Front by Wendell Berry. Love the quick profit, the annual raise, vacation with pay. Want more of everything ready-made. Be afraid to know your neighbors and to die, and you will have a window in your head. Not even your future will be a mystery anymore. Your mind will be punched in a card and shut away in a little drawer. When they want you to buy something, they will call you. When they want you to die for profit, they will let you know. So, friends, every day do something that won't compute. Love the Lord, love the world, work for nothing. Take all that you have and be poor. Love someone who does not deserve it. Denounce the government and embrace the flag. Hope to live in that free republic for which it stands. Give your approval to all you cannot understand. Praise ignorance, for what man has not encountered, he has not yet destroyed. Ask the questions that have no answers. Invest in the millennium. Plant sequoias. Say that your main crop is the forest that you did not plant, that you will not live to harvest. Say that the leaves are harvested when they have rotted into the mold. Call that profit. Prophesy such returns. Put your faith in the 2 inches of humus that will build under the trees every 1,000 years. Listen to carrion. Put your ear close and hear the faint chattering of the songs that are to come. Expect the end of the world. Laugh. Laughter is immeasurable. Be joyful, though you have considered all the facts. So long as women do not go cheap for power, please women more than men. Ask yourself, will this satisfy a woman satisfied to bear a child? Will this disturb the sleep of a woman near to giving birth? Go with your love to the fields. Lie down in the shade. Rest your head in her lap. Swear allegiance to what is nighest your thoughts. As soon as the generals and the politicos can predict the motions of your mind, lose it. Leave it as a sign to mark the false trail, the way you didn't go. Be like the fox who makes more tracks than necessary, some in the wrong direction. Practice resurrection.
You're listening to Back to the Roots podcast. I'm Mike Klein, and with Brian Wood, today we are in Campbellsville, Kentucky, on the organic dairy farm of Nathan and Jessica Williams. Nathan and Jessica, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for coming down.
Could you give us a little bit of a background of the farm and your operation here?
Yeah, so I come from, I guess, a long line of southern Kentucky farmers. We've been here kind of since the early 1800s in the Cumberland sort of River Valley. And then my grandfather actually bought the main farm in 1954. It was pretty rough shape, and he started a little dairy and, sold grade C milk like everybody back then. And then my father actually, farmed with him and dairied. And then I grew up on that same farm and, always just sort of like anything else gets in your blood. I have two brothers. We all always helped with the cows and everything. I milked in high school. That was my job. And then the farm we're at here is a farm that we purchased when we moved back home, and we kind of raise replacement heifers here and what other zoo animals I bring in, donkeys, sheep, chickens. My wife's over there giving me a look. So
I love them all. They're great. All the animals are great.
So are your brothers still involved in farming, or?
One of my brothers works, he's in ag in Virginia, and then my other brother here locally, he has a landscape business. He does a little bit of farming of his own on the side, but not really actively involved in dairy itself.
Mm-hmm. And how many acres and how many cows is your farm?
Right now, total heads probably about 90, 95. We're usually floating around between 40 to 50 on the line, and then total acreage that we're farming is probably around 400 and some. Just as, most of that's got a little bit of river bottoms where we generally try to raise our own row crop, so we try not to buy much feed, and then we've got a pretty decent forage base hay-wise. So it's good because we're usually trying to stay ahead on the hay, which helps.
I guess now I want to go back to after you left the farm, because you guys had left the farm and were professionals and not that you're not professionals now, but you were in Louisville. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Louisville?
Yeah, slur it. The more you slur it, the closer you are to the correct pronunciation, yeah.
But I'd like to kind of hear the story of what brought you back to the farm.
Yeah, we kind of mentioned this earlier, but growing up as a farm kid of the 80s and 90s, it was, staying on the farm was never an option. It's interesting now, you see kids that grow up in good farms here and they stay and stick around in grain farm or whatever, and the time period I grew up in, no one made any money, and we couldn't. I don't say that we didn't necessarily want to leave, but we all felt like we had to leave. There just wasn't any economic opportunity here. This part of the world was a big textile industry for a good part of the 20th century, and after NAFTA, all that got shipped out. So it was, growing up here, it was nice. I had a great upbringing, but it was very economically depressed comparatively to a lot of other parts of the world. So went away to college at UK, University of Kentucky, and studied agricultural economics. Went on to law school and that sort of thing. My wife, went to college there. And after that, we went up in Louisville for a while. I worked at a big corporate law firm. My wife worked at Yum Brands, which is like the largest, restaurant chain, KFC, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut. And then we actually went to the Middle East, lived in Dubai for a year, which was a nice experience, and came back to Louisville, and then we're there for about another 7 or 8 years. So yeah, we've seen a good chunk of the world. So that's, it's been nice to have that perspective, to appreciate what's here but what also is out there. So
Yeah, tagging on to how the story developed. So yeah, we lived away. We went to college. We had great jobs. Had the opportunity to travel quite a bit, especially with my job. Decided we would buy a house, settle down, have children, and it was around, it must have been about 7 or 8 years ago that Nathan came to me and said over and over, I think we ought to move home. I think we ought to move home. And I thought he was crazy, because why would we jump off this awesome kind of corporate trajectory we had? He had a great job that he liked. I had a great job that I liked. And then basically it was a Wendellberry poem that he sent me one day that kind of changed everything. And I started to recognize how when he says he wants to come home, it meant coming home to raise animals on the farm with his dad, to take care of the land, to raise our children close to their grandparents, close to their cousins. And kind of the older the children got, it meant more to me than ever, the idea of bringing them back home. So it was a move that a lot of people would say is completely crazy. On the other hand, a lot of our good friends completely didn't surprise them one bit, because we were down here every weekend, every chance we got, we were spending time here. So it was always kind of our little retreat, little vacation from the city. And when we moved, it was the best possible decision that we could have ever made.
How long have you been back on the farm?
So this is year 3. Yeah, we moved back summer of 17. We moved back to the main farm. I was, as I mentioned, there's a log cabin that was actually the original homestead that was built in the 1840s. And my dad had sort of renovated that, so we lived there for 2 years, kind of like, I don't know, kind of like the Waltons or something, best way to describe it. So it's a kind of American chestnut, this white oak, beautiful cabin. My dad did a great job, putting it back together, and it's right there on the, kind of in the barnyard, so to speak, so the kids are growing up with the cows walking by and baby calves running loose in the yard and sleeping in the shade of the trees and things. It was a really fun kind of 2-year reset, I guess you will, just to be there in the midst of it. And even this property here, like I said, I can still be at the main farm in 7 or 8 minutes, so it's about the right distance. Because my father, we work well together, but being on the farm, it's like if you live there, it's like if Cal gets out, it's just as easy to call me if I'm standing there at all hours. So a little separation's healthy. Mm-hmm. And that was part of it too. I remember thinking, I had some friends who their fathers, started, having heart attacks at 55 or 60 years old or whatever. And in the back of my mind, I'd always been thinking, I want to go home and, when Dad's older and I'm a little closer to retirement, we'll just kind of piddle around the farm together. And I realized that there's no guarantee that I would have that time with him. And fortunately, my father, he's in good health and good shape and can still go and do. And I thought, I should really start thinking about how to make that happen now instead of waiting another 15 years. And that was part of my thinking was just to get back while he's still going and healthy, and we can still work together. So
Well, it was really that transition to organic that really triggered our move a lot earlier, maybe 10 years earlier than what we expected, because it's so much more labor intensive. And this was even before you guys were certified organic, just the transition phase. I know you were having to come down and help a lot of weekends through the week. It just wasn't quite enough. And I think your dad finally said, I really want to do this with you, but I'm going to need you to be here. And that's when we had to have a serious conversation about what it looks like to sell our home and move away or move back. But again, I'm so glad that we did. But it's been I think it was the transition to organic that really, the timing, why that happened.
yeah, well, and part of the catalyst, well, actually, we were at a farmer's market that we would walk to near our home in Louisville, and there was an Organic Valley farmer who raises some chickens and different things, and has a dairy. And I got to talking to him, and I always find it funny. I feel like dairymen sort of gravitate to each other. You can see each other from 100 yards. That just, I don't know, tired look. So I talked to him, and he said, well, come down to the farm. And, I think at the time, OV was looking for milk. That was before, the kind of slowdown. But so we met with him, started talking to Jake, and Jake was obviously very enthusiastic about it. And I kind of thought my father would be, whatever, that's nice. I thought it would be an old dog, new tricks situation. And so to my surprise, my father, as I say, he kind of called my bluff, because I sort of if you'll transition farm to organic, I'll probably come home. And his response was, okay. And that was that. I mean, there was very little pause on his part. So like I said, he really did call my bluff. But in my father's mind, I think for him, it was more of going back to how he was raised. They always, he grew up cultivating, and it was a much more in line with how he approached farming. I always said, even before I really ever knew what organic was, my father just always farmed with his heart more than anything, as far as what he thought was good for the ground and not necessarily what was the easiest thing to pencil. Was always pretty quick to adopt conservation measures and instilled that in us. And I think it was just another challenge to him to sort of, and it also feeds into his low input view of things. And we'd always graze the cattle, so it's not like we had a dairy that was with a big, we weren't TMR feeding a bunch of silage. So that in that regard, it was a bit easier for us to make that switch.
Were you intensive grazing?
No, I wouldn't say it wasn't intensive. I mean, we'd always usually plant some sorghum sedan and graze summer annuals and things like that, graze wheat in the winter, but we certainly weren't rotating the amount of acreage we would need to do it the way we're doing it now. So there was definitely a learning curve when it came to grazing. And the grazing aspect of it personally is what I enjoy more than anything. I don't enjoy being on a tractor that much, but if I could, I always joke, if I could be a shepherd boy, that would suit me fine. So I like being out with the animals. I like watching what they're eating and figuring that out. But I can also already say I feel like grazing that's going to be a lifelong kind of learning process, because there's still things that I see. I was like, oh, I should have grazed that differently, or what am I doing that's causing this species to come back in a way that I don't want, and different things. So was
it a working dairy the whole time you were away?
Yes,
it was. Okay.
So they started, like I said, my grandfather started dairy in 1954, and my dad took over, and and my father always, he worked very hard at it, because he had an off-farm job. Actually, he was a UPS driver, and man, as a kid, I mean, he would, part of the time we had a milk can, and then I was about 13 years old. We had a milk can that left, and Dad said I was old enough to help him. So I mean, I would get up at 5:30 before school. I would feed and do everything while he milked. I mean, he would milk all the cows. He would go to his full-time UPS job, drive a truck for 9-10 hours, come home, milk them again, which my father's a workaholic in that regard. But I don't know that farm work is it just doesn't mentally hit him as work. He just enjoyed it. But so we started farming a lot together. Then that was kind of the catalyst, and I milked through high school and things like that. So but it's always been a working dairy. We were always milked Holsteins. Now that we went organic, and with the component pricing, we've brought in we're breeding the Jersey bulls now and have a lot more crosses. But
Okay. Now, did you grow up around the farm? You weren't a city girl?
Not exactly a city
Okay.
girl in Campbellsville. I wouldn't say it's a big city, but I didn't grow up on a farm though. And Nathan and I started dating in high school, so really from the time I was 17, which is now half my life or so, we have been together, and I've been on that farm. So when he started to talk about how important it was to be on the farm, and we spend a lot more time there, it's almost. I grew up there too, in a way. So
yeah, she's
it's
been kicked by a cow a few times.
I have helped him milk, and that's how I think you have a really good girlfriend if you're in the milk hand and your girlfriend comes to help you milk. That's dedication to want to see her.
And then once she had it locked down and she was married, and she hasn't been back in the milk parlor since.
No,
so.
I haven't. We were still dating when I remember the very last time I got kicked in the wrist, and I said, I am done. I'm not doing this again. And I did not do it again. I didn't. I'll help some other way, but it won't be that. I respect the dairies. I respect the dairy farmers for sure.
Now, do you raise quite a few row crops? You said in the bottomland you do some?
Yeah, we've probably got about usually we'll have about somewhere between 50 to 80 acres of just row crop. Like I said, we're generally trying to just raise enough. We pick a lot of ear corn, so we feed grain in the parlor. So not a lot. So whatever they get when they come in the parlor, and we've just never moved away from ear corn. So we've got a picker that we're always trying to keep running, and we'll do that. But it also helps us a lot. I always have the question about in the spring, do we have a lot of trouble with MUNs, spiking really high? And generally we don't, because I think my belief is that cob just gives so much buffer, and then we free choice dry hay pretty much year round as well. So, I think that adds a lot of benefit. But biggest problem for us generally is we tend to get some big rains in the spring that can drown out some corn, and then the deer pressure down here is pretty high. Like as I mentioned, we're next to a state park, and they come in off the river, and I feel like the first 12 rows of every field is just a donation to God. So
Your picker that you're trying to fix is probably a 325 new idea.
yeah, narrow. So it did good last year, knock on wood. So
If they work, they're so fun to run.
oh, they are. It's just it's very
That sound of hearing the first ears hit the empty gravity wagon.
that, and I feel like it's like the best yield monitor in the world. Because you can tell by how much corn's going up that elevator. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah. It's old school, and I love it.
Yeah. My father's very old school, and we tend to have we started getting some better equipment now, but like I said, when I was a kid, everything we ran was old school. So,
And that's where you develop mechanic skills.
yeah, I've got enough to be dangerous, but which we always ran a lot of whites, which you don't see a ton of whites down in this territory, but that was always our weapon of choice. So.
I love the story that you still have the one tractor you remember getting as a little boy, and it's still there, and you could never sell it. And now, just this summer, they went up in Ohio and brought back a tractor, and my son Jackson was a part of that as an 8-year-old little boy, and he's showing his son, this is something you'll always remember, and they still talk about that trip, and this was 6 months ago or something like that, and they loved it. But it'll apparently be on that farm until he's 30-something years old, too. Yeah. Love that story, though. I love it.
What kind of tractor did you buy?
It was actually, I think, summer before last, but it was a white 100. Okay. But we bought it, and this old guy had passed away. I think it had like 700 hours on it or something. It was pristine.
Wow.
And we just, put it in the field and let it go.
So is there a lot of dairy in this area, or are you far enough south that most of the dairy would be to the north and west of here?
There's actually, the county below us, Adair County, is probably one of the bigger dairy counties left in the state. I'm trying to, I think right now Taylor County, the county we're in, I think has 16 dairies left. But that was probably, when I was a kid, that was probably well into the 100. I can remember in our little river bend, there were 4 or 5 dairies within a 1.5 mile radius, and now I think we're the only one south of Campbellsville. So it's kind of weird when you're. I mean, I'm 37, so it's strange to go like, well, I can remember when I was a kid, and just that one thing about ag has changed. It amazes me how much it's changed in my lifetime. Is how all the dairies have just. I mean, they just left. Mm-hmm. But the county below us has a pretty good sized dairy base, but they're all conventional guys. So,
well, we went to talk to Mary Berry, and she talked about the destruction of the communities, especially these smaller communities, and how the little towns that used to thrive because there was agriculture in the community have just seen destruction because of that small scale agriculture is gone now.
And it was, here it was just so swift. I mean, I feel like, and it was just a series of 1-2 punches. The dairy thing, it happened, it feels like rapidly, but it's not like there was one single catalyst for it. We grew up raising tobacco as well. And of course, that left, sort of, we had all this kind of amalgamation of events. You had NAFTA, which we had a factory here that had good paying jobs, and it employed 3,000 or 4,000 people at really high wages. So it left, and then we lost tobacco, a year or two later. So like I said, it was the 90s that when all the rest of the country sort of boomed. We didn't boom down here. There was no. It was pretty pretty bad. But now, like our local Main Street, we've had a lot of people move back in, and some more entrepreneurial minded people. So it's definitely turned around as far as that goes. There's more going on like on our little Main Street than there was when I was a kid. Like that aspect of it's gotten much better. So there's some glimmer, I suppose, in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that we learned getting down here in Kentucky is how much the tobacco industry or tobacco farming was such a part of the culture that grew these farms. They paid for farms. It paid for farms.
Yeah, and that's why typically most of these farms down here were 60 to 80 acres. And these guys would have their 4 or 5 acres of tobacco, and you'd raise either a handful of beef cows or maybe you'd milk 20 or whatever the case was, and they just kind of put together this little diversified farm. And and I think what was interesting, at least from my perspective, I was talking to my grandmother about this. So my grandmother, who moved here with my grandfather, she's still alive. She's 87. Oh, wow. Her memory's sharp as a tack. She still lives a mile from the farm. And but all those guys came in on the sort of they all were Korean War vets. They all came in here all sort of at the same time, bought farms together, all in the same area. And she was telling stories about how they would help build barns together, and they would help harvest each other's tobacco crop together. So just a real very, very communal, more like what you would see today probably with Amish and Mennonite families.
But then mechanization came in and drove the need for your neighbor to come help you do your tobacco out. And you see that in the Amish community as they're allowing more modern equipment. The farmers are dropping.
Right.
Used to be 90% farmers in the Amish church in my area to 10% industry. Now it's flipped. It's 90-10, the opposite way. So now there's not enough farmers in the neighborhood to really help each other. So now they go with the modern or more modern equipment.
Yeah.
It's the Amish farmers in my area use the 2-row corn picker with the horses, but what they're using is the equipment that the tractor farmer used in the 60s and 70s, and now have adapted it to horses. So, yeah. But it's really, we're actually seeing the change in our community because of the lack of agriculture. It changes a community.
It definitely does, and it's I don't know. Like I said, it's weird because as a kid I thought, that had already really happened, but now I realize so much of it happened in the late 80s through the 90s. It was still rapidly taking place. Tobacco, I do miss. I understand obviously tobacco had and has its issues, but I mean it's just I can still smell it. I remember the tobacco barn where we stripped tobacco was with walking distance to the house, and I can remember being 5 years old and eat dinner and go, well, I'm going to go down here and strip tobacco and just hang out and listen to the farmhands cuss and tell stories and whatever. I mean, it was just, and then you go to December, January, you take it to market and you go to these big auction warehouses where everybody would congregate. Everybody's happy because everybody's getting paid, and there's always just an assortment of characters. Typically, you'd have these tobacco buyers in from the Carolinas and auctioneers from the Carolinas with their deep, these deep accents that you didn't ever hear as a kid, and it was really neat. It was really cool, and it was a very culturally unique experience that I don't think people who didn't experience it's hard to appreciate that.
And we did see some tobacco coming down through, Do they have markets for that?
It's all under contract typically
is.
now. So it's all when they got rid of the Burley program, I think that was like about 98. It basically went to a direct contract system. There may still be a small auction system, but not enough to really do much about it. And I don't know how much Mary Berry touched on it, but the whole, if you ever had some time to research it, the whole Burley sort of co-op system that came about is really interesting, and how it functioned and how well it functioned without really any government aid or support. It was pretty fascinating. And of course, but what it was also a catalyst of really severe tobacco monopolies, and there was wars fought over it essentially. So if you're one who's interested in reading, read about the Black Patch Tobacco Wars that happened down in West Kentucky.
Okay.
Yeah.
The contracts that are now, are the contracts not nearly as profitable as it used to be? Is that why you see so much less of it, or are there no contracts out there really to get?
Probably less. Yeah, it's just not as profitable. Tobacco is just so labor intensive, and labor's went through the roof over the last even 20, 30 years. I think the price that they're contracting at, the price for tobacco probably hasn't changed that much since 1985. And you're talking about diesel's probably quadrupled, labor's probably went up by 5 or 6 fold, and it's just brutally hard work. There's nothing. I have yet to see anything that I think is as hard physically as tobacco, as far as in the agricultural world. I don't think it exists.
But everybody you talk to that raised it has nothing but fond memories.
Yeah, that's true. That's exactly right.
And they all say it is brutal work. You had to get it done. Yet when I look at my childhood, the best memories I have was working together as a family, whether it be square baling hay, or I grew up Amish, so it was shocking wheat or shocking oats and threshing. But it's that community, family working together where in my opinion, the best memories are made.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Even you bring up a good point about we square bale a little bit of hay just for our sheep, but I think last year we'd square bale hay for the first time in probably 10 or 15 years, and I've got a picture of me and my dad on the wagon, and I looked at him and I said, "This might be the last time we do this together." I was like, because I don't want to do it very often. And then we square baled a little bit this week actually, but square baling, that's a very communal activity. Mm-hmm. And especially when I was in high school, you get some buddies together, and it was just always fun.
Mm-hmm. Well, even now, I think some of the best memories are, our kids are 8, or actually 9 and 6, and whenever we can do anything together, we're doing it. They want to ride the tractor whenever it's safe, whenever it's okay. That's what they want to do. We want to take care of the animals. We baby fed or bottle fed baby lambs. It's all of the activities that happen on the farm when you can invite friends and have family there. Those are the best, absolute best memories. And you don't have to have a big farm to do that either. You can just have a little spot. But that's been the best part of the last 3 years when I think about it. And all my favorite pictures is when we're outside and we're doing something with corn or cows. It doesn't matter, just being together. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that feeling of accomplishment after a hard day on the farm and sitting down under the tree before taking a shower and going to bed, I don't know. You can't explain it to people that have never experienced it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's nice too. As an attorney, there's always work. There's certainly a sense of accomplishment from completing a case, but there's also something to be said for being able to see what you've done. To be able to look at a field and go, okay, I plowed it, I planted it, I cultivated it. You can actually see the fruits, quote unquote, of your labor. So that's, I don't know, there's something very healthy spiritually about that. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mike, I think it was you that was saying that growing up on the farm, taking vacations, you took one vacation a year. You don't remember any of those vacations. It was the threshing crew or, the work you did as a family that is remembered today. And that's what you guys are building for your family too.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope so.
And I remember in '88 when the drought was widespread, we were out. I can't remember the date. Dad could tell you the date and the time that it started raining, but we were all out in the field, and everybody ran for the barn. We all chucked for the barn, and we're standing up, and it was an old bank barn, standing up, looking out in the field, and Dad's standing there with his hat off, looking straight up in the sky, just soaking it in. But it's things like that you don't realize until years down the road, how that's still vividly in your mind. It was just a great, looking back, it was just one of the greatest moments I remember.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's funny, I'll mess up the year. I think it was probably 93 or 4. We had a pretty heavy snowfall here. We would call it a blizzard, but it's not. But it was pretty nasty weather for south central Kentucky. And we had a calf that was born out in it, and Dad found it, frozen, almost stiff. And I remember he brought it in the basement of the house, and he didn't think we'd save it, but we had the honey and hair dryer and had it next to a wood stove and the whole bit. So we raised the calf in the basement for about 2 weeks in this concrete basement, and she wound up being in the herd for like 15 years, and her name was Frosty, fittingly. But it's just a very fond memory. Like, I remember raising a calf, in the basement, and I remember raising a pig in the house for a little bit, and we turned it out in the barnyard. It thought it was a cat for quite some time. It was a very confused pig. So
I think with small kids and animals, the possibilities are just endless. Because when I look at growing up, like, we had all the cats, you had dogs, you had all these animals to play with, and how they reproduced, you just knew how that all happened. There was no birds or bees talk or anything, but then you could take any animal and turn it into a pet.
Yeah.
And now I'm thinking, why in the world would I have wanted a pig or something like that? But at the time, it was a good idea.
We had a squirrel once. They do not domesticate well. My brother attempted a raccoon, but it was too old at the time. I'm trying to think what else we had. We covered most of the bases. So
we now have donkeys.
We have donkeys.
First time,
yeah.
That's first on the farm as of this week. Chickens.
The sheep are a new thing.
The sheep are pretty new, yeah.
So we have the hair sheep. And I'm just trying to bring in something that'll, they don't really compete with the cattle from a forage perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a decent. The market so far seems to be fairly steady, so I may kind of keep pushing into that. I mean, there's not really an organic market for that, so it's conventional as far as if I have to worm them, I worm them. But they're out here grazing with the cows. So
is that just to diversify the farm a little bit?
Yeah, and I mean, part of it too. So the farm I have here is about 110 acres. Like I said, we raise replacement heifers here, but now that I'm getting it dialed in, I've really honestly got more grass than I can deal with. And the easy answer would be, go buy some feeder steers and whatever. But we have a closed herd, so I'm pretty hesitant to bring in, cattle from another farm or cattle from the stockyard. And, I don't want to create a train wreck in my herd. So that's why the sheep seems like the safer play. And if you really look at them on a per acre basis as far as what they produce, if you're willing to manage them and spend some time with them, they're probably more profitable than beef, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, as far as worming, we talked to Max Stone, and he said make sure, move them every 3 days.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you should avoid the major parasite overload.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But when we came in the driveway, I'm from Ohio, so when I saw what I thought was Johnson grass, and you confirmed that it was Johnson grass, I'm like, oof, wow. And you said you love Johnson grass.
Yeah, I mean, it's the best, especially we get, our summers probably tend to get a little hotter than in your all's up there. I mean, and this was a good summer. I mean, grass generally kept going for the most part. But when it's 100 degrees, Johnson grass grows. And if you can get cattle on it, I mean, it's like candy. I mean, it's basically, like sorghum Sudan. It's not that good, but it's really, really, really good. And I was telling you, I mean, I can turn them in there and they'll eat the Johnson grass before they eat clover. So it's just that sweet. So it's one of those things. I think it's a good example. I mentioned this. That I really think had the universities, since the 40s worked with it instead of trying to kill it, I think it would have been, it'd be amazing what it could do. If we could breed it where it wouldn't, maybe go to seed quite so fast and a few other things. Now, granted, admittedly, like I said, you do not want it near a corn crop, but because you will not get rid of it. But
we have farmers in my area that are 100% grass, so they raise male sterile sorghum. Mm-hmm. And if you have Johnson grass, it will cross-pollinate with Johnson grass and throw a seed head. So, I mean, that's how close they are to each other.
Right.
So, but if you're grazing it, and let's say you have a 30-day rotation, is that too soon with Johnson grass?
That's probably about right in good, hot, humid weather.
Okay.
As I mentioned, you have to watch it. Excuse me. Once it gets a frost, it's toxic for a few weeks. I believe it's prussic acid that comes up in it, but otherwise, yeah. So, but if you've got it on a continuous grazing system or grazing it very short, it won't survive long. But I think we cut that for hay. I mean, you can see it's chest high out there, and that was probably 30, 40 days ago that we took hay off that field. So.
And they'll even eat it if it's that tall and in seed head?
Yeah. I mean, they don't like it as stemmy, but there's still enough blade there, and they'll probably, if a plant's chest high, they'll take it down to knee height or something like that.
And it makes milk.
Yeah, oh yeah.
You learn something new every day.
The biggest problem, so we're down the fescue belt here, and the biggest problem that we have, what will naturally happen in the pastures, you'll get a lot of fescue 31. And I kind of have discussions with RCS about this all the time because, everyone wants to get rid of it now. It's like it's just not trendy, and you want, novel endophyte fescue or whatever the case might be. But I'm generally the belief that fescue 31 will just creep back in. So instead of fighting on the fescue 31 side, I just tell people, embrace it, graze in the spring, try to put them on something else, through July, August, September, and then stockpile your fescue for the winter, because nothing's better than fescue as far as a winter feed. I mean, like there's a field out behind the house here now that, it'll stand there and it holds its nutritional value so well, especially once it goes through a few frosts. The fescue does that. You can graze cattle all winter on it. I've had cattle over here and never given them any hay all winter, and they come out just fat and slick because they've been eating grass all winter long.
So do you fence that off to stockpile?
If I'm doing, you could. I'll rotate a little bit. I don't worry about doing it as tight as normal because the fescue's dormant. They can walk over it 100 times and they can't do any more damage to it really. So I'll rotate it some, but not as tight as I would if I was grazing it like a normal, during the growing season.
Is there any way to kill Kentucky 31?
No. Spray.
No.
And the problem is, too, you can try grazing it hard, but it tolerates that so well, too. It's hard to get rid of it. And then there's starting to be some studies now, too, I think, that shows that if you've got it, as long as you have enough clover with it, the clover kind of helps offset some of the toxicity from the endophyte as well. So I've had a few cows that I can tell have some sensitivity to it. I've got a Jersey now that every summer she'll come in the parlor and her nose is snotty and she's breathing a little heavy and she just doesn't tolerate it as well. It doesn't, but the rest of the herd, and that's the thing too, I think, we've got a group of cattle, especially some of the Holsteins, they're, pretty much the same lineage that, my grandfather started with in the 50s. So I think at some point we've probably selected for that, tolerance, better than most.
So majority of your pastures would have some
in it. Yeah. We have pastures that we renovated several years ago, and obviously I didn't plant any 31 fescue, but I guarantee if I went back and tested what fescue that I planted that was novel endophyte, I'm sure it's crossbred back out.
Mm-hmm. What type of soil do you have down here?
This farm that we're on is it's very, very clay based. Now we have, and that's probably fairly typical for this area. This is I think my soil type here is Frederick. Now over at the main farm, we're on the river. We got river bottoms, and a lot of that's a sandy loam. So it does certain things well. What we have trouble with here, at least, is alfalfa. We have so much water that if I plant alfalfa, it won't last 2 years just because we get so much heaving in the winter through frost and things like that. Mm-hmm. And my dad's good about, he's kind of done it all, tried it all, and I've kind of started reflecting. I'm like, he's basically been farming, our family's been farming river bottoms for 200 years, so he probably knows what he's talking about. So he'll let me every once in a while try something. He's like, all right. And so we planted alfalfa one year, didn't last. Like, okay, won't do that again. He's like, told you. But he at least let me attempt it. So so we're still learning some things. And we did my big thing now as far as experimenting is I would like to figure out a better, a lower tillage system for the corn and row crops. And we had been no-tilling for 25 years prior to going organic. So that's the next thing. I like the organic thing, but I would like to figure out a way to reduce the tillage side of it as best we can.
What are you currently doing?
I've tried soybeans into cereal rye, and initially I thought that was going to go great. But again, with the river bottoms and so much water, I don't think my cereal rye stand was good. We had a really wet winter, and it killed a fair bit of the cereal rye. So I didn't have enough thickness there to make a mat. And so the soybeans still yielded, but they were pretty woolly by the time the season was over. This year, we sort of, I would say, a lower tillage situation. We'll see how it yields, but we had a field that I needed to rest, and I planted it in buckwheat. And then we went in, and I had a little bit of seed left in the corn planter, so I just ran the planter through it because the buckwheat had just went in the ground. So I've got buckwheat and corn, and I just let it go. And I'm kind of curious to see what the corn does because, if I could create a system where I don't have to cultivate and I can minimize tillage and create a biodiverse soil system, and, if I can get 90 to 100 bushel corn, then great. I would rather have that than have 160 bushel corn that I've had to push and fertilize and go over 7 times. So I'm going to keep kind of monkeying with that aspect of it a little bit. I don't know that I don't think organically you're going to be able to get away from, zero tillage. I don't think is on the table, but I definitely think there could be a way to, maybe we get where we only got to break ground every, third year, or maybe we do strip till into clover or something like that. There's some guys I know experimenting with that, and I think that system could be figured out. So I think about that a lot.
Well, University of Wisconsin, Aaron Silva, who we had on, has been doing a lot of research on no-till cropping systems.
Yeah.
So
beans seem tough. So far, they have not found anything that beans will work in. But corn, they've had, 60-inch rows was one thing.
Yeah, that's...
planting into, rye?
Well, the 60-inch rows has to be over 60% alfalfa stand or a legume stand. Then they have basically a 10-inch wide flamer.
Yep.
That's right in front of the row unit, scorched earth in front of it, but that'll give it room to grow, and then they mow in between the rows.
Yeah, and I've seen what I may try. My goal this year. So the buckwheat, like I said, the buckwheat and the corn was an accident. But like I said, the corn has made something. I guess it'll be 50 bushels. But I'd put the buckwheat in the ground first, and then brought the corn through. And my thought this year will be, or for next year will be, work the ground, plant the corn, and I've got a tine weeder. And then basically after the corn's planted, go in and tine weed buckwheat and some crimson clover or something into it, and let the corn get a little bit more of a head start. So this year the corn was starting at a 3-day delay. I can flip it around. I can probably give the corn a head start on everything else I planted and let it get up above it. And I think that'll do even better. So
you have an air seeder on the tine weeder?
No, I'll just broadcast
Okay.
and the tine weed it in. Of course, down here, we plant our corn really late, compared to the local farmers because we want the ground temp to get up nice and warm. Mm-hmm. And plus, we're on this river. We run cooler ground temps than even the rest of the county in the river bottom. So it's nothing for us to plant last week of May, first week of June. But the nice thing is corn's up in 3 days, so it's fast.
Is the tine weeder your main tool for weed control?
No, and actually this year I didn't get to run it at all.
Okay.
We caught a rain. So we always typically what I like to do is plant, wait 2 days, tine weed right before corn spikes, and then it'll spike. Then let the corn get up a little bit, rotary hoe twice, and then usually run the cultivator about twice. This year I missed the tine weeder. It got wet. I couldn't get in the field, and it showed. So
we have guys using their tine weeder in 12-inch tall corn.
Man, I tried running it last year in some smaller corn, and I stopped. I couldn't. I didn't have the heart for it.
They say do not look back because
No.
it's going to look awful.
And
but they said 3.5 miles an hour is the max speed you can go with the corn up.
Yeah, that was probably my mistake, is I was going too fast, which is what I like a rotary hoe. You just go as fast as possible. As I say, as long as you're not bouncing off the tractor, you can go that fast. So I'm a big fan of the rotary hoe.
That's why horse farming and rotary hoes don't work.
Yeah, you've got
to be running the gallop in order to get enough speed. Where the tine weeder, a team of horses walks between 3 and 3.5 miles an hour. So it's the perfect speed for the tine weeder.
Yeah. Yeah, the tine weeder, it definitely is more aggressive, in my opinion, the tine weeder than the rotary hoe. So, yeah, I had trouble going slow enough. So I literally just picked up and bailed on it.
They say if you aren't worried that you're taking out too much when you're cultivating or tine weeding, you're not doing it hard enough.
Well, we upped population this year with that in mind. So normally we would have planted 25,000 or something. So we bumped to like 32 or something like that, with the goal of knocking it down to 24 or 5. So, taking out 15-20%.
But boy, you look back and you see it looks terrible. It's like, I'm not sure I want to be doing this.
Yeah. The rotary hoe the first time, when I came home, and of course Dad had, he had run a rotary hoe when he was a kid. He's like, oh, don't worry about it. So, and that was, so we went around all over the Midwest buying up, we had to go buy a cultivator and buy another rotary hoe and that sort of thing. And I bought the tine weeder, which, because there's none in this country, I think it's more of a vegetable tool typically. So, I had to buy one of those new. But
what kind did you get?
Einbach. Yeah. It's the only thing about organic farming row crop. You better have a big machine shed, because there's always one more tool or trick that you think you ought to try. So,
Yep.
What drove you? You said you told your dad that you wanted to go organic. If he went organic, you would come back.
Yeah.
What drove you to that in the first place?
I think so. After we spoke with this, it was like this Organic Valley farmer, went to his farm. I think it was twofold. Part of it was the economics of it. I think my father and I both recognized, and this was before the latest dairy crisis hit, that, a small dairy, sub 100 cows was, not long for this world. And without a doubt in my mind, I don't think we would have, if we had still been conventional, we would not have survived the last kind of cycle of, because there's a lot of dairies down here that have been kicked off and different things. So that was certainly part of it. And then the other aspect of it too, I think when I saw it, I realized it was more in fitting with how I was taught to farm, how my father has always farmed with, he just never had this mentality where he was going to, row crop the entire farm, fence row to fence row, just because, economically that was probably would have been the correct decision financially, but it's not good for certainly not good for the ground or the biodiversity or the wildlife for that matter. I think I recognize that. And there's just something, I love the fact that I can, especially when we were at the main farm and, my kids are running around bare feet and, I don't have to worry, like, whatever they want to eat, touch, there's just zero fear in that regard as far as that goes. And I think that's a really nice aspect of it is not having to worry about that and, using the chemical. So,
The fence row to fence row, you said it might have been the most profitable or the right decision at the time, but I think we're seeing now, we drove down yesterday and we're starting to see the detriments of that are coming back to bite those decisions.
Well, and the other thing too, speaking for this part of the world, I look at, so I like my econ degree kicking back in, I have to look at it and go, what's our competitive advantage? And our competitive advantage certainly here is we can grow grass better than most of the United States. And, we're not, Illinois got better dirt, Iowa's got better dirt, but when it comes to raising animals on grass, I think we can do it as good as any other area of the country, generally speaking. And when I see farmers that, locally who don't sort of recognize that, if you think you're going to take a bunch of cattle and basically feedlot them, well, we're going to get beat at that in, Texas or Kansas or Oklahoma. We can't do that as well as they can. We just can't. So, part of it, just from a purely economic perspective, I definitely think embracing what this environment here wants to do. We grow grass really well, minus about 45 days in July and August, but so that's part of that aspect of it too.
But then along with that, you've got the opportunity, you get the heat units to raise some great summer annuals.
Right.
So you can fill that 6 weeks in the summer with a sorghum sedan or something to keep them on grass.
Yeah, and that's what we've raised sorghum sedan for many, many years. And I experimented with teff one year, hated it. We'll never do that again. So I'm a sorghum sedan guy, and I've put some sun hemp in with it just for some nitrogen. So that's an interesting plant. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but
not really.
It's a legume. Looks a little bit like a hemp plant. Smells a little bit like a hemp plant, but it's a legume. But the thing is, it'll grow as tall as a sedan grass will, so it'll grow 7 feet tall. Just to bring in a little bit of biodiversity into the paddock and that sort of thing, and the cows they'll eat it. So
okay,
I tried cowpeas, but it's hard to keep the sedan grass from smothering it and outrunning it. So,
Have you tried millet?
I haven't planted any millet.
That's with this new variety that we had what's his name, Ernest Weaver on, and he works for Byron, and he's pushing millet. And I think you got the right climate down here because
my brother Tim did it because he's a consultant for Byron Seeds. He put out a bunch this year, and the cows will not eat it for grazing.
But it harvests well.
He's hoping because he's got a pile of it.
Well, and that's the problem I had with teff. I've had guys talk about how much their cows like teff, and I couldn't get them to eat it. I mean, they literally would walk over it. And I said, I can turn them in sedan grass, and it'll be gone. I mean, to the ground.
Well, with the millet, when you feel the leaves are really rough. So in some areas they would eat it well, and in other areas they wouldn't. And I don't know, was it the nutrient difference in the field where it was more palatable in certain areas than others? But I'm really curious to see, because the forage tests that came out of it and their test plots that they did was great. So I'm really looking forward to those samples once he has those back. But he was really, I mean, we're talking 3 feet tall and just beautiful. Put the fence in and the cows were like,
Rather not.
Yeah. Moo.
Yeah, it would take a lot at this point. I think especially with the new, the BMR varieties they have, and I think they have some BMR millets, but the new BMR, those varieties on the sorghum sedan, that's kind of, I think, where probably what I'll be planting the rest of my life. So it's kind of hard to improve on it. It seems like they've gotten it where it's not nearly as stemmy. They've gotten a lot better about being pretty leafy. So pretty pleased with that.
I did just want to jump in and mention that I didn't fall asleep, and I'm actually really interested in these discussions. But something that I really appreciate that you guys are talking about are all the new things that you're trying, and that it's not as if this farming idea has been figured out a long time ago, and there's no more thinking about it. I love the critical thinking aspect of it and how you manage the grass and the cows and what they like and what they need. I'm from an innovation background too, and my job is consulting now with food service. I work with restaurants and groceries and convenience store operators, and they all have different challenges. So while I do not know anything about grazing and which grass seed to plant, I appreciate that you're trying to figure that out and that it's never ending. I just think it's a great discussion and a great community that you have, that you can talk to each other like this.
Well, it's come a long, long way in the organic industry just in the last 10 years, 5 to 10 years. The amount of equipment that's available, the different grass species that they're doing research on, all of it. I mean, it's just, we're going to see a lot in the next 10 years too.
Yeah. Well, Nathan's been picking up books from the 30s and 40s on our shelf that he's reading, because that's kind of what you have to go back to. There's a lot of advances in technology, but aren't you looking back to see how things were done back in the 30s, 40s, 20s?
Yeah, the sweet spot, I have figured this out. So it's funny, if you get pre-1900, they really hadn't, some of the scientific and agricultural thought hadn't advanced far enough. So you still see stuff like, for these market farms, like, keep your best ground should be in vegetables and lock the milk cow, in the barn and just feed her whatever's left over. But then you get into like the teens, 20s, 30s, the pre-World War II industrial era, and that stuff right there is, you're reading stuff and their crop mixes. It's good. It's really, really good information for the most part. And then as soon as anything after World War II is complete junk. So,
well, the Depression really made farmers really be good farmers.
Yeah.
And I remember my grandpa never threw anything away because he lived through the Depression, and the knowledge that got lost in those couple generations now, we're now 2 and 3 generations of big ag chemical farming. So to take a step back and try to glean that knowledge, like you're saying, from the 20s and 30s, that's the important thing, because they did so much without all the technology. So now we can take that and use some of the modern stuff and take it to the next level.
Right.
But what's so exciting about, for me, doing this podcast is talking with different farmers who are doing all these innovative things, and then talking to you and other people about what they're doing. Like this sharing of information and knowledge is what's going to make the organic community work and grow.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, and that's, the fun part too. It's, if you're raising conventional corn, let's say, at the end of the day, it's sort of gotten down to this sort of, very chemical induced science. But the fact is, it's sort of all been figured out to a large degree. With the organic side of it, of all of it, I feel like it's just like the Wild West in a good way. There's a million. I mean, I legitimately believe I might figure out a way to raise no-till corn down here that no one's tried yet. I may not, probably won't. But the fact of the matter is, it's just not a simple answer, and I like that aspect of it. And the big thing too, I think some people don't appreciate. I mean, the reason there's some money at the moment in organic, in a sense, is that we're being rewarded for our knowledge and management. And in my opinion, the conventional ag world doesn't do that anymore. I mean, conventional farmers, and I say that because we've been conventional farmers at one time as well. We've sort of been conned into this situation where we're taking all of our production dollar and we're going to basically spend it in machinery and chemical and what other voodoo juice somebody can come to sell us, or seed corn, or whatever the case might be. So it's not that. I think it's just they've taken all the value out of the labor side of it for the farmer, and all of the value out of the management side for the farmer, and that's where I think organic it's to me very intriguing, because I think it still rewards good management and labor skill. So,
and it changes from farm to farm too, because like you said, on the conventional side, it's very chemically heavy, scientific heavy. What you do here is similar to what they might do in Wisconsin, depending on soil type, I realize. But with organics, you have to work with the nature, with what you have on the land you have.
Right.
And what works here versus what works in Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, they might not be similar at all. But you're working with, what you have, and like you said, that's management.
Yeah.
And you're getting rewarded for that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of exciting to see that there's the economic incentive to be that manager that works with nature and be rewarded for it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, this sounds crass, but I mean, Roundup made all of us lazy. I mean, it just did. Mm-hmm. And I think I do think we're approaching a period where the herbicides and all these miracle concoctions are not going to work the miracles they once worked as far as on weed control. And I think you're going to have to start. I think there's going to, even in the conventional world, they're going to have to go back to some tillage from time to time to control some of their weed issues. But we'll see.
I had an organic neighbor raise corn silage, and I had a conventional neighbor raise corn silage, Roundup Ready, triple stack. They both had weed pressure like you wouldn't believe it. Okay, the organic guy missed his window to cultivate. Okay. That's what you risk with organics, is Mother Nature saying, no, we're going to rain this week. Okay? So you can't cultivate.
Right.
The other guy sprayed it twice, and it looked horrible. His seed corn was how much more expensive per bag? All the stuff he put on, the cost of his corn was way higher than the organic guy's corn. And I'm seeing more and more soybeans and corn with weed pressure that we did not see 15 years ago when Roundup Ready corn was really taken off. We're now seeing those plants have evolved and mutated into something they can't kill them.
Yeah, well, like the big thing I see around here, I see a lot of mare's tail. And I've had people go, what do you do about mare's tail? I was like, mare's tail doesn't like a cultivator. I was like, I don't have mare's tail because it cultivates out easily. I mean, the biggest thing, like I said, Johnson grass, there's no cultivator on earth that'll kill Johnson grass other than, a 10-year-old in a hoe and digging it out of the field and packing it out. But the other thing too, like we've got a conventional farm nearby, and they've I think they've brought in, they farm 30,000 acres, and they've brought in Palmer amaranth in their combine, and because I'd never seen it, we saw it this year, and a neighboring farmer said, "What are y'all going to do?" I was like, "Well, we're going to, I actually think it'll be less of an issue for me than it will be for a conventional guy, because I still think it'll cultivate out fine. Mm-hmm. I'm not happy about it being around, but."
Your grazing is going to help a lot on
right.
that too.
Right. They'll eat it. Because we have pigweed, the old kind of what I call spiny amaranth and different things, and cultivator takes care of it for the most part. And so I don't think Palmer will be that much different. But yeah, I mean, I think the weed pressure challenge is it's about to get really interesting over the next 10 years for the conventional guys. So
we also talk so much about how hard it is for organic weed control, but I think it's actually going to become easier on the organic side and harder on the conventional side. I think the scripts are going to be flipped, because for a long time their weed control was really, really easy. Mm-hmm. And I think we're going to see that balance is changing with the tine weeders and the things that are coming out. It's still going to take hours. It's going to take labor to do it on the organic side.
Right.
But you know what? I'm much more willing to spend extra 10 hours doing it that way and then spraying on a potion.
Yeah, and giving them my money to Bayer Monsanto.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we've touched a lot of topics, and I found this really interesting. Your story is beyond intriguing. So I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to have us in your beautiful home here and got us into a part of Kentucky I've never seen before. So thank you so much.
Yeah, good to have you. Welcome anytime. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.